I'll get you dialed in on where we're at here. This is Rep 1 of the commercial wheat variety trial. So we farm in 7 different counties across the state, and this is one of our locations where we're testing. There's around 50 commercially available varieties. We test a lot of experimental varieties, so there's a finite number of entities that are developing soft winter wheat for the eastern U.S., for Michigan. We got KWS cereals. We got folks from KWS are here today checking out their plots. We've got GrowPro is another entity that's marketing into Michigan. Corteva also markets into Michigan, under their Pioneer brand, but then they also sublicense to other companies, right? There's middlemen essentially that are then connecting with seed companies, right? We have a great certified seed network within the state of Michigan, and I think one of the best management decisions that you can make as a grower is to identify the highest yielding variety for your farm, right? What I'm saying is that it pays to try out new genetics for your farm. From the highest to the lowest yielding varieties, there's 12 to 15 bushels, right? If you could do something to give yourself a 10 bushel yield, I'm not saying this is going to happen every single time, it just depends. But if you could get up to 10 bushels of a yield advantage, right, just doing something that you normally do by just changing out the variety, that's something that would be beneficial, right? Now, I also want to highlight the value in planting multiple varieties on your farm, spreading your risk, right? There's a reason that there are index funds in the stock market, right? You're not going to invest all your money into Netflix and have it lose $50 billion in value in a single day, right? That's the risk of planting a single variety. And there are genetics out there that you can get away with this. You're sort of getting away with something there. But what I'm saying is that you can't identify those varieties that have all of these critical traits, right? But the benefit of having multiple varieties is that they balance these traits out, right? If you have a high-yielding racehorse variety that is, let's say, vulnerable to stripe rust, for example, you should have on your farm a variety that has flag leaf resistance to stripe rust, right? And these are data that we are collecting every year in the commercial variety trial, right? I just wrapped up a couple weeks ago screening the varieties out here. Good news is, when it comes to stripe rust, over half of the varieties are resistant to stripe rust, right? It is such a, all of these companies and groups that are developing varieties all the way, they work from south to north, all the way from the upper Mississippi Delta up into Quebec. They see everything in these trials, right? And so they're able to usually remove those susceptible varieties just because they don't yield, right? Another important pathogen we're screening for resistance to is leaf rust, right? You probably don't see it a lot, right? Doesn't matter, right? And you're probably, maybe your fungicide regimen accommodates that, having a susceptible variety. But we did see leaf rust about 2 weeks earlier than any other. This is the earliest that I have seen in 13 years that I have seen leaf rust arrive in Michigan. And I don't know that it's blown up to epidemic levels, but it is out there, right? And it is something that we need to keep an eye on. But now, having multiple varieties on your farms allows you to balance the risks and strengths of each of those different varieties. But there are cases where you can't have it all with a variety. I want to highlight we can't stop thinking about head scab, and the most important management decision for controlling head scab is variety selection. There is a tremendous range in susceptibility to this pathogen, and it exists. It's everywhere, right? Every grass that's growing in these tile ditches can get fusarium. It'll infect everything: corn, wheat, oats, all of it, right? So it's always there. You just need the right environmental conditions. So having a resistant variety planted on your farm is the first level of defense, and then applying the appropriate fungicide at flowering, getting your timing right, that's the second level. So we screen varieties. It's FHB's coming on like gangbusters down in Lansing, where we've got our nursery. So we essentially put all of these varieties, any commercial variety that's available, we put it through these proving grounds, right, for these foliar pathogens, but for head scab as well. So we get great support through Congress with the U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative, right? This is supporting 30-plus different breeding programs across the country, and so this part of why we made all this progress on resistance and controlling scab, why it's not the same kind of a risk as it was in 1996, right, is because of the investments we've made and the research we've done in that area. But have a look at that. So if you're not satisfied with the level of scab resistance or stripe rust resistance in your variety, have a talk with your seed dealer, and I guarantee that there are options available for you. So part of what I want you to do today is to get an idea of what we see for variability and differences amongst these varieties out here. So we're developing these varieties at MSU, so I want to highlight a couple of them that we could talk about here. So we've got a soft red winter wheat here. It's a red wheat, MI20R12, but this is a line. This was a cross between Hilliard and an MSU line, but we've got some pretty good yield potential for this line. We've got to test it another year to 2 years in the commercial variety trial, but we should see that out and about pretty soon. Some varieties you might be familiar with, I'm guaranteed somebody's growing 9242W, the Dynagrow line out here, right? This is a pretty good line for scab resistance. It doesn't have the yield potential that some of the other varieties do, but it's still a good investment for growers. You could check out all the variation. You can see the differences in canopy architecture, and feel free to have a look around at all these too. You won't damage them. But here's a good example of Wharf being that very upright plant architecture. It's it's kind of a rare bird, a very high yielding line with this type of canopy architecture that can be productive under these 7.5-inch row systems too. So there's a lot of options out there. So if you're not 100% satisfied with the variety that you have, there are a lot of options. I don't like to throw shade on a lot of varieties, but I did point this one out. If you're growing sunburst, you can do better. This is the 15 bushel yield advantage if you're able to change out sunburst, and I don't do this very often for varieties, but it also only has a 65% flower yield compared to 70 to 72% for the majority of these varieties. So you're losing flower yield on that. So that's right. So the activities that you all have on your farm are directly affecting every other step along the wheat value chain, right? So we could be out here for quite a while talking about wheat varieties and all the different things that go into it, but I want to make sure that the one message I want to leave you all with, because harvest is going to be coming up pretty soon, right? It's going to be coming up. Harvest early, and this is in the vein of the discussion of being able to move that grain all the way from your field all the way into the supermarket as smoothly as possible, right? Does anybody know what I'm getting at here? Harvesting early? I'm talking about falling number. Nobody wants to talk about falling number, but we're going to talk about it a little bit today because it directly affects your profitability. And you have some control. We don't control the weather, right? 100%. We can predict it to some degree, but we don't necessarily. All we can do is prepare and have a game plan. And I want part of that game plan for harvest is to get out there as early as possible. If you're at a decision point, if your crop is at 19%, 18%, and I know it can depend on where you're at in this part of the world, this should be routine for soft white wheat growers to be out there as early as possible. And most companies will absorb early on in the harvest season. Most companies will absorb that drying cost, right? Why would they do that? Because they're guaranteed a high quality crop that they can actually turn into a very specific flour product, right? So you have to have that high quality grain to be able to develop a marketable product, right? So there's risk. So if the best thing you can do is harvest early at this point right now. We are also screening commercial wheat varieties for falling number, right? This is difficult, and it's different. In states like Washington State, they have like 20+ variety trial sites, and they put out a falling number risk variety, and they just look at that variety to see if they actually got falling number pressure. We create the falling number pressure. For every variety out here, commercial varieties and experimental varieties, we have a separate trial with two replicates where we go out there and we're going to end up pulling just thousands upon thousands of heads, right? Because every falling number run, so let me back up a second. Is everybody good with what falling number is? That test itself, right? So you're essentially making, I guess, a gravy out of that grain. So you're going to take a grain sample. You're going to the same sample that's going to get tested for Don, right? They're going to mill that with a coffee grinder and get a 7-gram grain sample for that. And so you're going to mix that with water, right? And the rate, and then there's the rate. The reason it's called a falling number is it's a glass test tube, right? And then there's a metal probe, metal rod that will drop through that. So essentially you create a slurry, right? Flour, water slurry. You heat it up, right? Just like you're going to make a gravy, right? And so that metal rod, the rate at which that rod falls through that solution determines what the falling number is. So if you have a thicker solution that has not, so this is with no rainfall at harvest, where you have very high intact starch molecules, right? Low glucose, very high starch, right? It's going to have a thicker solution, it's going to move slower, right? That's why a 300-second falling number, that's good. It takes a long time to run the test, but that's a good thing, right? Now, the lowest possible falling number you could have is 60. Right? And I wish that for no one, because that's just basically that rod. It's water at that point. It's sugar water. There's no starch left in it. And we do see some 62-second falling number for our soft white winter wheats. That can be an issue. Now, something I want to point out, there are differences. Yes, we know that soft white winter wheat is more vulnerable to low falling number, pre-harvest sprouting. Yes, that's true. What we've been working on the past few years is to determine what is the timing of that vulnerability. How much time do you have? And it comes down to the first 48, right? You've probably seen that show on TV. Same thing with falling number. What happens in the first 48 hours is going to determine what that falling number is going to be. So for soft white winter wheat, we have about 36 hours of rainfall that it can tolerate before it gets below that 250 to 200 level. So we're looking at about 36 hours. It's cumulative, too. We've done this study where we've rained for a day and let it dry for a day, and then rained again for another day. It's the same as 2 days. So it comes down to how long was the rain event. Now, we don't know how much. That's another level, right? But we do know we've looked at duration, and we know that for most soft red winter wheat, we have 48 hours. You're going to be okay. It's going to be low. It's going to be in the upper 200s, but you're going to be okay, right? You're not going to get docked. It's a 250 level, right? It has to come out of the field sooner for soft white winter wheat. So you have about 48 hours for soft reds and about 36 hours for soft whites, right? On average. We do have some varieties that are performing a little bit better in terms of falling number. I haven't marked out here, but we have a new soft white winter wheat from Michigan State University that does have an advantage over current soft white winter wheats in terms of falling number, right? It's able to hold where after 2 days of rain, 48 hours, right? Other varieties are hitting that 150, 175 falling number range. This variety is at like 200 to 225, right? Doesn't hold 250 from 2 days of rain, but it's close, right? So there is genetic variation for this, and so in our falling number nurseries, we're sampling spikes right at physiological maturity, right? When that peduncle, what's connecting the spike to the rest of the plant, right? That conduit there, when that goes from green to yellow, grain fill's over, essentially, right? There's some spike photosynthesis, yeah, but it's minimal, right? So that grain fill period is over, and so that's when we go out there to harvest. We after ripen for 5 days, dry it down, and then we go into the misting process. So we're using 2 days as our metric. So we're separating varieties based on how well they can tolerate that 48-hour. Yes, question. Right when it starts to rain. So. Oh, yeah. So that's another open question too, right? So current dogma is that there should be no pre-harvest sprouting activity, i.e. the enzymatic activity, like the amylase enzymes, the germination process that gets triggered by the rainfall. It does start. The dogma is that it doesn't start till after physiological maturity. But there is, and then it's also dependent on the after ripening period. So the longer you leave it out in the field, like if that crop was at 15%, the longer you leave it out there, the higher the risk, right, of that falling number reduction. So what I'm saying is that there can be variation due to that after ripening period and when you start the misting process. So if we cut it right at physiological maturity and left it sit there for 7 days, everything would be visually sprouted. I'm using the old visual sprouting, language there, not necessarily. So actually, running falling number is a new thing, right? And we're one of the only programs in the eastern U.S. that's actually doing that. So I haven't really given you a solid answer, but that is an open research question that we're looking at this year. Is there anything going on like earlier or when, relative to physiological maturity? So we have a study where we're looking at a day before physiological maturity, and then we're looking at a day after, and then another day after that. Yes, yes. It turns straw color when it goes from that green, and there'll be some variation too. And you might see micro variation within a plot, right? You might see some. It can vary a little bit across the field, but we're looking for within a plot. We're looking for those spikes where that peduncle has lost the greenness and gone to well, not a brown color, but a nice bright golden color. You can differentiate that pretty well. And then there's that period of essentially the dry down period. That's the after ripening period that we're also looking at. The differences in the length of that and how it affects the ultimately affects falling number, the falling number outcome. Yes. That's another layer of research. What I can say is that there is an effect of just environmental moisture, humidity, and fog do affect. They can affect the infection by fusarium, yeah, right? I mean, so there, we would expect to see that. We would expect to see variability due to. Now, can I quantify that, right? Fog versus actual rainfall and how hard did it rain, gallons or inches per, whatever the rate, right? So now we're getting at the rate and the volume of it. We've just looked at the time duration under a very specific set of misting conditions. I don't have like the gallons per minute rate for you, but we're getting at the challenges of working with this disease, I guess you could call it. It's similar to a disease, but this production challenge. So there are environmental variables, but we're really trying to look at some of the things that we can control very well, the timing of the misting treatments, and then the genetics too. So we're trying to fix a couple of those variables in the system and look at those to get a better handle on the whole system. Very good. Other questions, comments, concerns? Yeah. 120. It was palpable. You could just feel the difference going from 60 pounds of N into the variety trials where we're at 120. It was palpable, the difference, definitely. Yeah. So 120. We might be a little bit low for some farms, but this is what we're working with. It works well. This was a split with 28%. We went 60 at green up and then 60 at around 6 or 7. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? All right. Very good. Thank you all.
Let's give Eric a hand. Okay, next on the docket is lunch. So if you want to head back to the wagons, or if you want to walk up, you can walk up as well. But let's head up and we'll get something to eat.